You can access the ETL in the cloud or a repository by clicking on the Data button in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. Now, once in the repository feature, there's a number of things we can do here, including uploading a file, looking at the details of my existing repository or existing tables, or to-do lists, which you'll see as we build these out. A user can have one or more repositories assigned to their account, and you can think of a repository as a database server and the different repositories as the different databases that would exist on that server. Whereas the tables are going to be the different datasets or database tables that would exist inside of that database. So you'll see under Change Repository, there can be multiple repositories I either own or that have been shared with me. Now, let's start by uploading a table or a file into this repository. So I'll select Upload, browse out to my file of interest. In this case, I've got an order to cache sample data file that I'd like to upload. I simply point to that CSV. You can either upload CSV or zip CSV files, and I select Upload. Now, very quickly, it'll run through the process of ingesting that data into my repository, and in less than a second, we've got it. And you can see it here, listed under my tables. And if I click on Tables, you see I have detail around how many records are in it. And if I'd like to access this specific table, I select it, and I get a snapshot as to the data that exists within this table. Now, before we go into this screen, I'm going to upload one more file that I'm actually going to choose to do some functions on. So I'll choose to upload a second file. This is going to be in a different directory this time. Here we've got some shipping data. So initially I uploaded some retail order to cash data, and now I want to bring in some logistics or shipping related data. And what you'll see is the creation of a join in between these two data sets. And we've got our second table uploaded. So we've got now our list of two files with our records. And now we can look at both and get an idea of the fields that we're working with. And when you look at any given table, you've got the table name, the number of records that are in it, who owns it, and when it was uploaded or created. We also have the capability to be able to clone any one table. So let's say we want to go off and run some test operations on any given table. It would be a good idea to maybe just clone this at its base. So why don't we just name that? So I'll clone this table as a base, and then when we go back into our table list, we'll have essentially a base or backup table to revert back to, should we have a need to be able to do that. Now let's walk through the process of creating a couple of operations on any given table or data set. Let's create a set of operations designed to join across the two data tables that we've uploaded, and then eventually load into an actual project. So along the top, we have the ability to add operations. You'll see as we go, we'll build out this list of operations. So I'll open up my operation module, and we've got a list of different operations that can run. As I mentioned, we'll look at joining. But let's go through some of the options we've got here. The ability to change the case of a field to upper or lower, change types of fields. We'll actually go through an example of this, changing this datetime field to a date field type, combining timestamps, creating timestamps, date adds, running date diffs. We can clean up data if we need to delete any records based on certain criteria, or if we simply just want to delete certain duplicates, derive new fields based on existing fields, joining, loading into a project, which we'll touch on, and then string cleanup, like removing some string, replacing it, rounding timestamps, trimming spaces, and so on. So that's a pretty extensive list of operations that we can run. What we'll do next is we'll start by joining across our retail to shipping data set. So I'll select join, and we could then write a description for that. The first table column that I want to join from is actually based on my order ID. So these two data sources share an identifier field. So I'll join based on my order ID to match coming out of my shipping source that identifies our field here and we should have a logical match. Now, which fields do I want to bring from my secondary table? I can select those. I want to bring things like the origin and destination city from my shipping source, as well as maybe who is the courier on that specific package. Alright, so I've chosen the fields that I want to bring in. You can see that this is actually by default an inner join. If we want to make it a left join type, we can select this Keep Unmatched Records checkbox, and we'll bring in all the data that we've got, regardless of if there's a logical match on the join data. You can also choose to filter this data, and you'll see this with many of the operations that you can run, where you can select to use a filter, input some filtering logic, essentially adding a where clause in your SQL query, and that way you can only transact this operation on the specific data that you're interested in utilizing based on the filter. So for this case, we're going to go across our entire data set. What I can do now is run a preview. So I'll quickly run a preview just to see what our output looks like and see if we get some logical results. This actually won't transact on the database. But what we can see here is I'm actually getting data returned in the 3 fields I'm pulling from my secondary table. So all is well and good. Looks like I have a logical join, and we can go ahead and maybe name this joining to shipping operation and save it. Now, once you save that operation, there's a number of options. You can either edit, which will bring up this same panel we just went through. You could delete it, of course. Once we have a list of these operations, you might want to move it. Insert it before or after other operations. You can run this singular function or operation by itself. And again, once we have a list, we might want to then perform it from the start and watch that whole chain be run. Now, in this case, what I actually want to do is add a secondary operation to change this date time field from a string type to an actual date type. So that way, I can use it for my timestamp field. So we're going to choose a change type operation to do that. Now, what we could do, if we'd like, is to run an automatic type detection full type. Essentially, what that will do is allow the system to scan all the data and all the columns and return the type of data each column is. If you have a large data set, that could take some time. And in this case, I don't necessarily need to do that. We can take this string, and you can see all the fields are by default brought in as strings, and we can pick and choose which ones we'd like to change the type of. In this case, I want to change my date time field to a date. If I had a numeric field, I could change it to a number, and so on. I can run a preview, but in this case, I'm pretty confident I've got date values in this field. So I'm just going to save this. And what I'm actually going to do next is run this from the start. So we'll run both of these operations by clicking Perform from Start. And we should see some extra columns pop up here based on this join logic. So let's let that run. We should also see this date time field turn into a date type. So perfect. It looks like we've run that. We've got our date field defined, and we've also got our extra join data added to our table here. Now what we'll do is, since this data is essentially ready to be loaded into a project, I'll add one more operation which is going to source this into any project. Now you'll see I can select any project that I've got available to me. I can also create a new project based on this logic. Let's name this because I've already got a project created for this. So I'm going to load this into my order to cache join project. So I can select that. Now what I need to do is define some mappings to load this data into this project. Now we've already got some mappings defined for this project, so we'll open that up, and you can see it's already mapped by default. But what you might have to do, if you've never mapped this data structure into the project before, is just define these mappings. Define the attributes you'd like to bring in. And you know what? let's actually add the extra attributes that we wanted, and let's change these names so that they reflect the best header possible. So now we've got our data mapping set, and we can select this mapping, save it, and now we've got a mapped loading into project operation. Now you can see here, one valuable aspect of this repository and ETL in the cloud functionality is the ability to load a single data file into multiple projects. And that can be useful when you might want to utilize a different timeline ID or process identifier to give yourself a different perspective on the same type of data. So for example, maybe in this project you've seen me load, we're using an order ID to map to our timeline ID. If I wanted to have a second project which maps on something like a customer ID or an employee ID to give myself a totally different perspective on that data set, I would simply just add that operation, choose my project out of my list, and choose the differentiated mappings. So this alleviates the need to have to load the same file across multiple projects. Now in this case, we've got everything. All of our operations done, we've got our data load defined, so let's just perform that. Now what this is actually going to do is take this data set, load it in that OTC join project, and what we'll be able to do then is navigate directly to that project and see the data. The other thing to mention here is the ability to save these functions, this string of functions, as a to-do list. So let me just quickly do that before we move out of the screen. Now if I choose to save the set of operations as a to-do list, what I'll need to do is name it, and we'll just call it our OTC joint, and now we'll see it pop up under our to-do list. The nice thing about to-do list is that I can now save this set of functions and actually execute it across any other file that I load. So now we've essentially got a library of our functions that we've created. And now if we were to select to execute a given to-do list, I can choose the file that I want to execute it on. So this will alleviate the need to go in and recreate like functions on similar data structures, right? I can use this as a one-to-many type of feature, executing my to-do lists on multiple different files. Now since my data load was completed, what I'll do is I'll open up my project and go into OTC join. And now you'll see I've got all the data loaded, including the fields for my join. And my extra values and obviously my datetime field work for me. So this has been a quick high-level tutorial on the repository and ETL in the cloud feature.